One of them had been tasked with selecting men from among his subordinates and colleagues. These men needed plenty of stamina and had to cope particularly well with the cold. Now he understood what it had been about. The young man no longer used the name Jinshi, but Lehaku couldn't speak the name Ka. One might write it, yes, but few could actually say it aloud. Jinshi entered the stronghold, and Lehaku came up behind him so as not to be left behind. Gershan was nowhere to be seen. Instead, a stern-looking young warrior stayed close to Jinshi. Lehaku followed them both inside. The interior of the fortress had a nose-prickling smell, something like rotten eggs. Lehaku was just wondering what it could be when he saw men carrying armloads of snow downstairs. Was there a fire on the lower level? He quickly asked one of the men, who confirmed that was exactly what had happened. There had been an explosion. If we don't handle this quickly, the mistress will. The man trembled uncontrollably, unable to meet Lehaku's eyes. Lehaku let him go. Was it the smoke that made the man look so pale, or was it fear of this mistress? Perhaps it was the unexpected turn in events that had left the stronghold defended by fewer soldiers than the attackers had anticipated. Lehaku covered his mouth and approached Jinshi, kneeling respectfully. "Do you have counsel?" Jinshi asked. Lehaku was grateful that he had initiated the conversation. "Speak freely, as you command, sir." Lehaku wished he had learned more proper diction at times like this. "I don't believe we can stay here long with all this smoke, and I expect those inside will be in a hurry to get out." "I realize that," Jinshi said. Lehaku cursed himself for stating the obvious. He said, however, there may be someone inside who cannot be allowed to escape. "Then, sir, I'll have all my troops look for them. Please head outside." "I'm afraid I can't do that." Lehaku resisted the impulse to frown. He was glad he was looking down toward the ground. It would not be good for Lehaku if Jinshi was injured. He wanted nothing more than to get the young man out of there, to a place where he could watch the operation from somewhere safe. At the same time, this was the Forbidden Army. That meant Jinshi's place was at its head. The ambush they were planning did not make him more willing to leave his place. Standing at the front of the force meant he would lose his identity as the eunuch Jinshi. Losing that identity would upset the balance at court. The Shi clan had been an important part of the balance, and it was now in shambles. Lehaku could see this himself. Some family members might be hiding among the captured enemy soldiers. Capturing them was good, but their guilt was already clear. Those who conspired against the emperor could expect the extermination of their entire families at best. The sovereign's personal mercy might temper the outcome to some extent, but the Shi clan had little hope to cling to. "Grand Commandant Kan's daughter is a prisoner here," Jinshi said. Sir Kan was a very common name. Only one official in the land possessed it, the eccentric strategist. Before the mission, Lehaku had been informed about her. First, he learned that she existed, which was one more surprise on a day full of them. Second, he learned that no one knew why she had been abducted. Jinshi asked, "Can you abandon her?" He could not. That much at least was certain. Lehaku said it without meaning to. "It would make me a new political enemy." For a second, he thought he saw something mix with Jinshi's hard expression. "Yes, I believe you are right." He looked agonized, as if he was going to be torn apart, but he moved forward. Lehaku stood up and pulled at his hair. But the only thing he could do in this situation was to complete his assigned task as quickly as possible. Along with the blast came a great rush of snow. She knew intellectually that this was called an avalanche, but it was like a snow dragon descending upon them from the cliff behind them. The haze of white did not quite reach Maomao, but it obscured a building she thought was a storehouse. She observed this from the balcony. The explosions had frightened most of the workers from the basement. The few who remained were trying to fight the fires. They would have to split their efforts once again to deal with the avalanche. She saw soldiers leap over the outer wall and stare in amazement at the scene before them. Then there were those who could not escape. Something white flashed over the now thinly defended walls. The color blended in, and she could not see very well at this distance what it was. But she saw panicked soldiers confront it, and then a flash of red erupted through the night. Blood landed on the pure white snow. The white thing was an intruder. He cast aside his white cloak to reveal a full set of armor. Did he come to bring the rebels to heel? For an upper consort to flee the rear palace was as good as rebellion. With her family making their stand in a fortress like this, there would be no excuses. Am I safe here? Maomao wondered. She stopped when she saw the invaders in the distant light of their torches. She wasn't sure how she knew, but she did know. She was sure she had seen him. A man with a beauty that seemed more suited to a peaceful setting than a battlefield stood before her. He wore expensive armor and looked like a true soldier. Could he be here to rescue her? Probably not. Even he wouldn't have that much time to spare. Her eyes must have played a trick on her. The form soon vanished as the invading forces continued to flood into the stronghold. They would be here soon, and Maomao had no idea how they would treat her. The smell of sulfur was everywhere. Was it from the explosion? She pressed the sleeve of her robe to her mouth so it wouldn't poison her. She really should just run. One thing was for sure, she wouldn't have a leg to stand on when it came to criticizing Shisui after this. What was she, some kind of idiot? She must be an idiot, she thought as she stopped. She could hear footsteps coming closer. Her heart was pounding. They wouldn't finish her off right then and there, would they? Whoever it is, she hoped they would at least hear her out. At that moment, someone kicked down the door. A soldier wearing bluish-purple armor stood in the entryway. He did not say anything. She did not say anything. Neither of them spoke. After a long moment, Maomao spoke first. I am sorry, but might I ask you to protect me, Master Jinshi? Are you hurt? The soldier, Jinshi, asked. He could see the blood on Maomao's clothes. I'm all right. It's just spatter. That's not all right. It's snake blood. Jinshi did not look like he thought this was any better, but Maomao found his exasperated expression oddly reassuring. It was so familiar. She felt the corners of her own mouth softening into a smile. Hey, is that Jinshi stepped closer and was about to say something, but they were interrupted by another set of approaching footsteps, and his expression changed abruptly. The look on his face was not that of the eunuch with his delicate, nymph-like smile, nor the somehow childish young man. A rough-looking man said, "My lord heir." That title no longer belongs to me, Jinshi said. A royal son has been born. Consort Jaikaiu had safely delivered her child, and it was a boy. So that is who he really is, Maomao thought. For a man who was not a eunuch to enter the rear palace was a serious crime. Only those who shared blood with the emperor or who had his specific orders were allowed to do so. You seem to have aged a good deal, Master Jinshi. She spoke rather softly, yet he glanced in her direction with what she took to be annoyance. Is Lihaku here? Jinshi asked the soldier. The big dog-like man soon bounded into the room. Jinshi said, I'm leaving this in your hands, and then he left. Lihaku tilted his head, crossed his arms, and furrowed his brow. Forgive me, but you look an awful lot like a young lady named Maomao who works in the palace. That would be because I am. Lihaku might be making silly remarks, but he was dressed in proper armor instead of his usual robe of military office. He also carried a club. What are you doing here? He asked. I seem to have been kidnapped. The angle of Lihaku's head tilt increased further, until it was practically horizontal. Say your dad is probably exactly who you are thinking. Please do not say his name, just call him the old fart or something, I will know what you mean. Bowing to Maomao's wishes, Lihaku did not go on, but he did tremble visibly. After that he smacked his fist into his palm as if everything made sense. Maomao did not know exactly which dots he thought he was connecting, but she was not sure she liked it. Lihaku pointed to Maomao and said it is her. A subordinate of his gave him a dubious look, but pulled a whistle out of the folds of his robe and blew on it. Lihaku said to Maomao, Hey, I'm sorry about that. If you say so, I'm sure it's true. You look a fright though, you are covered in blood. Are you hurt? It's spatter. Lihaku was as rude as ever, but he looked at her with genuine concern. The worst of Maomao's injuries was a scar from where Shenmei had hit her with her fan. The soldier, whom Maomao couldn't really dislike despite his manner, must have gotten some blood on himself as well. She smelled iron when she got near him. Well, please don't be hurt, Lihaku said. The old man insisted on coming along even though he can barely move, and wouldn't you know it now he can't move. The old man. He said it. He'd actually said it. The old man was probably the one who had dreamed up this whole ambush, Maomao thought. Perhaps he found some way to start the avalanche too. Lihaku did not look too worried, but that did not mean he wasn't taking his job seriously. What's this? Sleeping children, he clomped over. Maomao threw out her hands to block his way. They aren't breathing. They were given poison. Lehaku grimaced, probably registering what a terrible thing he was seeing. But if the kids had survived, the only thing waiting for them would have been the gallows. Even an attempt on the life of a single high consort could lead to the conspirator being hanged. Their family's assets would be confiscated, if not worse. The crime happening here was very serious indeed. Everyone could expect punishment, even women and children. Maomao studied Lehaku's painful expression. What happens to those who are executed? She asked. Are they simply left behind? No, not at all. They are laid to rest in a special cemetery. But they will be cremated. Can they not at least be buried with their mothers? Lehaku gave her an inarticulate look, then scratched his head and groaned painfully. He said he did not really know. That was not his job. Nonetheless, Lehaku approached and took one of the children in his arms. He took the covers and tore them in two. He wrapped the child with them as if in swaddling clothes. It is almost like they are just asleep. He thought maybe he could carry all of them at once, but this child is pretty heavy. He wrapped the next child in the remainder of the torn covers. He tore the sheets and continued swaddling the children. They began to think there wouldn't be enough to carry the last child. Then the soldier standing guard at the door took off his cloak and brought it over. Lehaku commanded someone to call a couple more men. He hefted one child in each arm. Master Lehaku, someone asked. We cannot bury them all together, he said, but I would feel a little sick just leaving them here. We could at least bury them somewhere close to the graveyard. Quietly, he smiled, showing white teeth. You don't think you'd be charged with a crime for that? I don't know. If I am, you'll just have to figure out a way to save my skin. Yes, I'm sure it will be just that easy. Maomao folded her arms, somewhat annoyed, but then Lehaku looked as if he'd had a flash of inspiration. That's it, that's a great idea, he said, grinning. What is, sir? If you called the old fart daddy, he'd do anything you asked, right? We need hardly say how Maomao responded to that suggestion. Sorry, pretend I never said anything, Lehaku said, averting his eyes. Apparently her face had been just that terrible. Chapter 21. How it began. There was a piercing whistle. Jinshi felt his anxiety ease a little bit. The whistle was the signal that the mission had been carried out. Several short tweets indicated a problem, but one long tweet meant all was well. Lehaku must have gotten Maomao safely out of the fortress. Jinshi emerged from a long hallway. He thought back to the blueprints he had studied on the way here. Ahead of him there should be a large open room, an office, and then the living chambers. Basin was right behind Jinshi. Usually this would have been Gaoshan's place, but Gaoshan had his own job to do. Basin had a habit of getting a bit out of sorts when standing in for his father. Don't get too tense, Jinshi advised him, speaking softly so that only Basin would hear. Two other officers followed them. Basin said, allow me to go in front. Jinshi understood what he meant. Basin wanted Jinshi to be protected both ahead and behind. Jinshi chuckled, then went to push open a heavy door. Suddenly he was seized by a bad feeling. He told the others to step back and not to stand in front of the door. Then he pushed it open and immediately flattened himself against the wall. An almost deafening roar passed by him. What was that? Basin demanded, scowling. Nothing I didn't expect. If they were producing fire powder here, one could at least assume they would use Fafer in the fighting. There were constraints on where such weapons could be used. They were vulnerable to inclement weather, and even when in good working order, Fafer took time to reload. One needed at least as much space as there was here in this stronghold. It was just as Jinshi had predicted. In the large room beyond the door, some men were frantically trying to reload their guns. Let's go, Jinshi shouted. At the same moment, the men in the room tried to abandon their guns and draw their swords, but it was too late. Fafer were fundamentally intended to be used with several people switching off firing. These men had missed with their first volley, and there was no time to reload fresh bullets. There were about 5 people, all dressed in gorgeous clothing. Jinshi recognized several faces. The distinctive smell of fire powder filled the large chamber, which was floored with flagstones. Where is Shishu? He asked. He assumed everyone in this room was a member of the Shi clan. Their soldiers had abandoned them when they saw the battle was lost. The Fafer were a last attempt to turn the tide. Not feeling talkative, we don't know, one of the men blurted, his eyes fixed on Jinshi. This was never our plan. He was shouting with such excitement that spittle flew from his mouth. Basin quickly moved to restrain him, afraid he might throw himself at Jinchi. We were tricked, we were just dupes. The man cried from where Basin pressed him to the floor. You brazen one. Basin, enraged, shoved the man's face even harder into the ground. We have proof that you scoundrels embezzled national funds to rebuild this fortress, and you stood here with weapons drawn against us. Even if that were your only crime, you know what it would entail. Basin pressed the blade of his naked sword against the man's neck. The man was practically frothing and looked utterly desperate. He stammered, I swear I didn't know. He said this was for the country's benefit. We did it all for our nation. Whoosh! The sword fell and sparks flew as it struck the stone floor. The man, his eyes practically popping out of his head, stopped his jabbering. A dark stain spread across the floor underneath him. The other men stayed silent, perhaps not wanting to be in the same ignominious situation, but the fear in their eyes was complete. Jinchi wished he could tell them not to look at him like that, but how could he? They could beg him for mercy with their eyes, but the judgment upon them was irrevocable. All that Jinchi could do for them now was to stand firm and let the spear tips of their emotions lodge in him. He said, do be kind. Choose the sword now or the scaffold later. Surely you could have the decency to simply end it for him. Basin and the other soldiers took up fighting stances as a voice approached, accompanied by noisy footsteps. A portly man shuffled slowly into the room. It was Shishu. He held a fafer in his hand. Jinchi looked at the man known as the Old Tanuki. You seem quite relaxed, Shishu. He produced a scroll from the folds of his robes. The scroll was sealed with the Emperor's personal insignia. It instructed him to apprehend the entire Shi clan. Still moving slowly as though he had all the time in the world, Shishu leveled his gun. Have you taken leave of your senses? One of the soldiers asked in a quiet voice. Shishu did not have any flint, and the man thought that meant he could not fire the gun. Jinchi grabbed Basin with one hand and one of his subordinates with the other. He pulled them both down onto the ground. The explosion happened next. The bullet bounced off the wall and struck the Shi man on the ground in the leg. He was a most unfortunate fellow. His scream echoed around the room. Shishu said to the screaming man, "Oh, you are embarrassing yourself. Didn't you shoot an animal with this thing just to see how it felt?" And I was so eager to try it out on a real human, truly a shame. Jinchi registered the complete lack of emotion in Shishu's voice. It was as if he were reading from a script. Or was Jinchi simply imagining things? It looks like this is the end. What I wouldn't have given for a little more time. Then Shishu cast the fafer aside. He looked at Jinchi, and for just an instant his face softened. What was he trying to say? Jinchi never had the chance to ask him. Perhaps Shishu would not have told him, even if he had the chance. Go, Basin shouted while still on the floor. Blood flew through the air. 3 swords lodged almost at the same time in Shishu's plump belly. He did not even cry out but just looked upward. A red froth foamed around his mouth and his eyes were bloodshot. He did not collapse but gazed at the ceiling with his arms spread wide. Was that laughter or was he cursing? There was nothing special about the ceiling. Perhaps he was looking through it to something higher still. Jinchi did not understand. He felt like he was watching a performance, as if this place was Shishu's theatre and this moment was his stage. Without revealing what fascinated him, Shishu expired. It was perhaps anticlimactic, but he was gone. Beyond the great room was a hallway. It was full of thinly clothed women and outrageous men. The women were babbling ceaselessly. They were eager to tell him who was within, in exchange for their lives. The men kept insisting they weren't members of the Shi clan, unlike the women. Jinchi understood the desire to save one's own life. He could not bear watching everyone betray each other to survive. He left the task of arresting them to his subordinates. He had been informed that the former consort Lulan and her mother, Shenmei, were in the innermost room. But when they arrived, Basin, who entered first, exclaimed, "There is no one here." They found only a large bed in the middle of the room and some couches. Clothing was everywhere, along with scattered wine and pipes. A clinging aroma filled the air. It was easy to guess what they had been up to in here. Basin's face was red, but not from anger. Jinchi, in something of a daze, tossed aside the incense burner. Some kind of dried herbs spilled out. If the apothecary girl were here, she would know what they were and what effect they had. Where did they go? There was no one on the balcony in the next room either. Did they jump down? Jinchi puzzled as they surveyed the balcony. The room they had passed through and the one they were in now were supposed to be about the same size, according to the blueprints, but something seemed off. The second room felt smaller. He moved between the two rooms. Only one door led into the innermost room, and the balcony was on the far side. The room felt more spacious because there wasn't much furniture, but the distance from the wall to the balcony was shorter than the dimensions of the other room. He went back again and inspected a chest of drawers by the wall. It exactly matched the missing dimension of the other room. He silently opened the chest.